Welcome to Questions of Life. I'm here with Donald, and we are exploring questions to do with Halloween. Here's the next part of our videos. And one of the things that we always want to remind folks in the midst of this is that whether people have dabbled in any of these areas, that God is bigger, that God is more powerful. I remember an instance, probably about 5 years ago, of somebody that I knew, somebody that I'd spent time with, and they were working somewhere, and they were in a pub, and at the end of the evening, people decided to get a Ouija board out, and this person was, I don't really think I should be doing this, and everybody was like, go on, come on, do it, and that whole sense of, feeling pulled in to be with the crowd. Anyway, it came to their turn, and she was really freaked out by it all. She was just like, what on earth is going on? This is horrible. And the Ouija board, they were trying to get the Ouija board to give her a message. And the Ouija board spelled out this message. And it was, go and see Cath Horn. Go and see me. And so she came to see me the next day. And we were able to pray together. I was able to reassure her and give her a sense of peace. And for me, that really encouraged me that actually God is all powerful. That people may try and dabble. And I don't underestimate the power of things that go on, but ultimately Jesus died and rose again and has conquered death, and it talks about his resurrection making a public spectacle of Satan and triumphing over them by the cross. So there's a quote that you like. Is it C.S. Lewis?
Yeah, C.S. Lewis says that there are two great errors that people have. One is to be obsessed with Satan, and the other is to think he doesn't exist. I'm paraphrasing. But both of those are damaging, and we need to have the right perspective, which is that Jesus, as you say, is completely dominant and greater. And just to clarify on your story, it was not suggesting that you have an Ouija board to hear God speak, but that in his mercy, he rescued that person from a frightening situation. Yes. And I think that we have to have an assurance that Jesus is stronger and greater. And sometimes you come across elements of Christianity that I think are too frightened of evil. And that's what superstition is. And so a lot of our superstitions are derived from Christianity and people being afraid, and so afraid that they have to touch wood because that's actually was a sign of touching the cross. You don't have to touch wood. It doesn't matter whether you walk under a ladder or not, although it might be wise if the person is about to drop something not to do it. But superstition is an unhealthy fear that in some way the power of something is stronger than Jesus, and that's rubbish, and we need to rest in the assurance that Jesus is greater. But equally, not to dismiss things and say, well, it doesn't matter whether I play with a Ouija board or whatever. That too is unhealthy. We have a right perspective. There is another religion, it's called paganism. We're not pagans. There is some element of power within that, but it's completely inferior to Christianity. And Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and he conquers all evil.
Okay, a few questions that are linked. Do ghosts exist? And then another one, what about magic? My gran is a Christian and refuses to read Harry Potter.
Do ghosts exist? I think that paranormal experiences exist, and that there will be times where things are inexplicable, and that there are pagan spiritual things that are damaging and unhelpful and not from God. A lot of it's fake. A lot of it is charlatan stuff, but people may well have had profound spiritual experiences. They will not be actual dead people who they knew. They will be other paranormal spiritual experiences, and they're stuff that Jesus wants to cleanse and protect and not cause any fear or doubt. So do ghosts exist? They are not real people, but there may well be paranormal experiences that people have had that are other spiritual powers and forces. Does magic exist? vast majority of magic is illusions. So when we talk about magic shows, it's just people doing illusions. That's fun, that's harmless, as long as we're clear it's an illusion. I think that our own view, right or wrong, our own view as parents was that when our kids were 12, they were fully able to understand the fairy tale nature of magic and to understand those things. So we didn't let our kids watch Harry Potter until they were 12. And then we felt they were old enough to understand it, old enough to appreciate that. And there's a lot of good stuff in Harry Potter about the triumph of good over evil, but I don't think it's appropriate for little kids. That's my own personal view, and I would reserve it for older. I think that it is, if we go back to the Christmas conversation, I think lying to children is really unhelpful. Never tell kids things that you know aren't true, but pretend that they are, unless you're telling them that you pretend, whether that's tooth fairies, Father Christmases, magic, anything. Tell them the truth, because otherwise they grow up and they say, you told me about Jesus and you told me about the tooth fairy, how do I know which one's true? So I would say with magic, always just make sure it's an illusion, it's a fairy story, but be age appropriate, and that's, I think, important.
Great. Okay, another question coming. They're all coming in thick and fast. Do you think / feel things are harder now than they were years ago? It seems Halloween is much more publicised and celebrated now than it was when I was a child. That also goes for easy access to older age-related films that are applicable online. It's a tough world bringing up children. Steve Evans.
Yeah, it is. I think it is harder. There's always been peer pressure. I think there are other tools. It's never been easy to say to a kid no. It's never been easy to say to a kid, we do things differently in our home. The battleground is different. But we have to work out when is it appropriate for a child to have access to the internet, and how do you. There are all kinds of parental controls and stuff that's available. So in a sense, it's a little bit easier than it was maybe 10 years ago. There's much more understanding of controls, but you have to have the courage to enact them and enforce them, and to say, no, you're not having that yet. And so go back a little bit to the question about watching things. I think there's a whole area in all of this about us not saying, well, it's okay for me, but how do I help other people? And when you say no as a parent to your kid, you help all the other parents. I remember a conversation where there was something that a group of parents were together, and we'd said no, and other parents said, thank goodness you said no, because you said no, we could say no. So sometimes I think we have to help each other, and you say no, and you do that for the other parents, and the same goes to watching things. That you actually start, if we sit down and watch a film, it may be that it's completely fine for me. The person I'm watching it with, it may give them a nightmare, it may desensitize them, it may give them an unhealthy attitude to women, it may make their anger more profound. So for the sake of somebody less strong, I will say no. I don't need to go, I'm not going to watch this film, we're not going to do this thing. And peer pressure happens for children and it happens for parents. And that's the irony. You think that when you grow up, you're not going to be vulnerable to peer pressure. You're just as vulnerable. And you just need someone to say, do you know what, we're not doing this. And we have to be the first to do that. And sometimes that gives permission to others. But it's tough. And I think you have to compensate. You have to say, okay, well, we're saying no on that, so let's go out and do this instead and do other stuff. Like we try to compensate with Holiday Club. We try to say, let's make Holiday Club the thing. So we're not thinking about Halloween this week. You try and compensate. You try and give them something else that's better.
So that moves us on to what should a Christian response be to Halloween? So as Christians living in this world, we're allowed to celebrate it. We're allowed to go to parties. What do we do when people come trick-or-treating? What should our response be? Do we just say, oh, this is wrong, this is of the devil, or having nothing to do with it? What would you say?
Well, I think underlying it, I would want to say that I believe and recognise that I live in a non-Christian country. I've never thought that Britain was Christian, and I don't expect it to be Christian, and I don't think it's particularly biblical to be Christian, and I don't think it's particularly necessary for me to moan when I think it is being un-Christian. I happen to live in this secular pagan state. So I don't think it's always helpful to... I think you've got to choose the things you make a big deal about. I'd rather make a big deal about poverty. I'd rather make a big deal about injustice. I'd rather make a big deal about racism than make a big deal about Halloween, personally. Mm-hmm. It's part of our culture. My approach has always been to ignore it. We just had nothing to do with it. It's not something I will go and campaign about. It's not something I'm more worried about people starving, like we talked about last week. I'm more worried about folks of colour being abused than I am about Halloween. We just ignore it. I just had nothing to do with it. And that was been my approach. Rightly or wrongly, I just never answered the door. And if I did open the door by mistake, I just shut it. I said, sorry, we don't believe in it, and shut the door. I probably had a slight reputation as a grumpy old man.
Grumpy old man.
We had our house egged a couple of times. That doesn't make me want to give them sweets. It just makes me think it's not something I can do anything to do with. I think there's a lot of the New Testament culture, which is more the culture we live in, is that we are aliens in another land. And we live as Christians in a culture that doesn't understand Christianity. That's my mindset. I live in a nation that doesn't get it.
But I suppose I want to flip that around. So I recognise that we are aliens, but I don't want to alienate everybody in my local area from building a relationship with them and then finding Jesus. So your approach and my approach are very different. You'll slam the door in their face. I will always buy some sweets. I will always open the door. I will always enter into a conversation, because for me it's about community. These are folks that live down my street. Their parents are often at the end of the road. Hi, how are you doing? I don't want to be seen as the old cat woman that is the weird old Christian that puts everybody off Christianity. Now, I'm not saying what they're doing is the world's most fantastic thing, and some might look at me and say, well, you're encouraging it. But what I'm encouraging is conversation. What I'm encouraging is relationship. That actually I feel if I shut myself off from everybody else, I'm shutting off opportunities to talk to them. Now, I know some people that will have like a Christian tract, and I know someone like J. John's written one on Halloween, and he's written it for Christians to give to people that know nothing about it. So it gives the whole history of it and why you shouldn't do it and how brilliant Jesus is. Now, for some people that might work, but for me, that's not my bag. That's not my kind of thing. That's not how I work. I think the people around me would probably egg my house just for that very reason, and it would exacerbate this, you weird Christian. So we're different. So somebody did ask the question, what should you do when people trick or treat? I think it's a personal thing.
Yeah.
I wouldn't slam the door in their face because I think that's rude. I'm sure you said it nicely and didn't say it rudely. I'm not so sure now, looking at your face.
I'm afraid I did do it rudely to 15-year-old yobbo teenagers.
Great. Okay. Why?
Because I felt they were trying to intimidate.
Okay.
And I don't feel that's a healthy thing to give into.
Okay. Excellent.
I think if you've got two little sweet little children, absolutely.
Yes.
When you've got a gang of teenagers who are trying to intimidate, I don't.
Yeah, I know. I think that's different. In my area, in the Hayes, we tend to get cute little kids.
Oh, okay.
So if it was a bunch of teenage lads, I'm not sure I'd be quite so...
No, we didn't tend to get cute little kids.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a difference. I think as well, I'd want to say, if you're living on your own, that you shouldn't feel as though you have to answer the door
No.
to anybody.
It's probably, I think not answering the door is a very healthy response. So
Yeah.
that was what I tried to do.
Yeah.
It was only when I realised that I'd opened the door and I thought it was somebody else. And you're confronted with the local youth.
I'd love to put your address out and encourage folks to come over on Saturday, but I won't do that because I'm not cruel. Okay, so what about lots of television programs have a Halloween special? Strictly used to, X Factor used to. Is it okay to watch those?
I think it's an opportunity to have a discussion with kids, to explain what you feel about it. I think you just decide on the age of the children, you just decide on the degree to which that program is glamorizing darkness. You take it case by case. I think if you're an adult, I can't imagine that you're going to come to any harm watching a strictly Halloween special. We're not to be afraid. That's the key thing, that Jesus is greater or stronger. If you're watching it with a child, you might want to use it as an opportunity to explain some things. You might want to ignore it. I think you've got to look at it case by case and in proportion to the people you're watching it with.
And what about carving pumpkins? What's your take on that? Have you ever carved a pumpkin?
I think my parents did it when I was a little kid.
What do they do, like the face?
Yeah, I think it's scary. I wouldn't do it with kids. I just think it's designed to be frightening. And I just think we should protect children from things that might give them nightmares.
Some Christians redeem it. So some Christians would quite often carve a cross. So they have the light of Christ shining. What do you think of that?
Fine.
Yeah. So
Fine.
to take a cultural thing and say, right, we'll still go and get a pumpkin, we'll still carve it, we're going to do something a little bit different.
Yeah, I mean,
we believe in Jesus.
I think with all these things, I don't want to set of rules. All we're doing is sharing our experience. We have to listen to what God is saying, telling us to do, not to judge people who have a different answer, and not to feel there is a right and a wrong response. So, don't do what Donald says or does. Do what you feel is right.
So finally, if somebody has been to a Halloween party or dressed up as a witch, or their kids have gone, they're not possessed. It's not the worst thing in the world to have done.
No, when we talk about possession, we're talking about inviting a power, a spiritual force other than Jesus to help us with something. That is a known, conscious, adult thing to do that is not advised at all. Very, very few of us have ever done it. If we have done it, we'll know we've done it.
Yep.
And Jesus will set us free from that when we confess it and repent of it. Satan is not like COVID. You can't catch it off somebody. It's an invitation to say, I want this power in my life. That's very, very rare.
Give them permission over,
Give them
aren't you?
permission.
Yeah.
If we've been to things and they've left us with a legacy of uncomfortable, feeling unclean, feeling afraid, then Jesus wants to set us free through prayer. It's not that we're possessed or anything like that, but it's something that's given us a stain, if you like, and he wants to wash us from that. So, but don't go looking for it if it's not there.
Yeah.
I don't think children that have gone to parties are in immediate danger or anything like that at all. It's more, has this left a memory or a dream? And then you deal with that if it's there. If it's not there, don't worry about it.
Perfect. So, summing up.
To sum up, Halloween is a celebration of darkness and an enjoyment of fear. Both of those are completely opposed by Christianity, I'm glad to say. We're not into fear, and we rejoice in the light. Jesus is stronger than the darkness. And if we're afraid, then just ask Jesus to set you free and to ask him to cleanse you. If you are unaware, just be cautious of what you watch and celebrate and the subtle influence it has.
Brilliant. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Thank you all ever so much for tuning in and for being with us this evening. Thank you for all of your questions. We love it when we get lots of different questions in. It's far more exciting than me and him prattling on. So thank you for that. If anything we've talked about has affected you, please do email us, get in touch, and we can talk some more about it. But thank you so much. Next week, we're going to be back live, and we're looking at the whole subject of, is God fair? So many people have questions and say, God's not fair, he does this for them, he doesn't do that for me. So we're going to be exploring, is God fair? So tune in either on YouTube next week, or if you want to, you can come and join us live in the church. If you go to our website and just click on the box, Questions of Life, you can very easily book in and be with these wonderful people who are here this evening. This Sunday, we have 3 live streams. 8:30, 10:30, 6:30. 10:30 is a little bit of a different one this week, isn't it?
Yeah, 10:30 we're going to celebrate our holiday clubs of the past. We're not able to run a holiday club, but we're going to share some stories and remember last year's and other things. So it's just a celebration of fun and of children and praying for children and praying with children.
Yeah. So do join us. That is the 10:30, but there's also one at 8:30 and 6:30. Again, thank you for tuning in with us, and we will say cheerio. Goodbye.
Bye.